to the Pitch to Purchase podcast. I am your host, Lisa Rabel. I am so happy that you're here today. Today, we're going to be talking to Sue, who's a brand strategist. But before we do that, I would just like to thank everybody who's been watching the podcast. Your feedback to me has been amazing, and I so appreciate it. So if you're new to the podcast, hit subscribe, hit the alarm, so you'll know when new episodes drop. But this month, we're talking about branding and what the difference between a brand and branding is and all of that great stuff. Because whether you know it or not, if you have a company, you're branding. It just depends upon whether you're doing it intentionally or not. And that's truly the key to what branding really is. It's not about your logos and all the other things. It's really about the promises that you make to your customers and if you fulfill them. Because the bottom line is that when your brand is off, not only does it confuse people, it makes them keep scrolling. The quote is, branding is what people say about you when you're not in the room. That's your brand. And so what I want to go over today with Sue is something about the fact that we don't always understand what people say about us. And we don't think that the things that we do within our brand have a ripple effect, and they do. And the conversation that I have with Sue is really fun. First of all, the two of us could geek out for a really long time about marketing and branding. But we really get to the nuts and bolts about what is your brand? How do you make sure your brand is on point? And if it's not, what to do about it. So I hope you really enjoyed this episode of the Pitch to Purchase podcast. My conversation with Sue was so much fun. Enjoy. All right, this is like the favorite part of the episode for me. I get to interview some amazing, wonderful people in the realm of marketing and leadership and client experiences and sales and all kinds of things in the Pitch to Purchase podcast. So today, my guest is Sue Kirchner. She is the president of Brand Strong Marketing and the host of her own podcast called The Turbo Branding Show. And I've been lucky enough to be on her podcast as a guest. So welcome,
Absolutely.
Sue. I'm so happy that you're here.
I'm excited to be here, Lisa. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, absolutely. What's funny is like when we're not recording and the two of us get on a conversation, like we lose track of time because we can geek out so badly on branding and marketing and all the things. So we'll try to keep it in check today for you guys.
Exactly.
All right. What I want to talk about today is branding specifically, because there's so much confusion around what is a brand and what is branding, what is a market, what is marketing. Like I just want to clear it all up.
Yes.
So if you've ever been told that you need to improve your brand, this is what you need. This is the definition of what is brand and branding. So first before we get into all of that great stuff, tell the audience about you and what you do for your clients.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Well, I am a brand strategy consultant. So I like to say I'm the person you work with before you spend any money on marketing, because you want to get your foundation set for how you're going to go to market. And whether that's, the products you develop, whether it's the communications, or even the customer experience. So what I do is I help companies, founders that are scaling, really understand their brand so they can tell their story in a way that helps them attract the customers they're going to want to grow, helps them attract the employees they're going to need to serve those customers, and also attract the capital they're going to need in order to pay for all of this growth as they start to scale. So a lot of what I do is customer research, which we'll talk about when we talk about what is a brand. But I work with my customers because 9 times out of 10, the founder and the executive team will tell me, "Hey, this is what our brand is. This is what we think we want to go to market with." But I go out and talk to their customers because the brand resides in the minds of your customers, and say, "Hey, you tell me what you think the brand is of this particular organization." And 9 times out of 10, what the founder told me and what the customers say is not exactly the same.
Exactly.
So then we dig deeper into, well, is it the messaging? Are you not talking about yourself in the right way? Or is it the customer experience? Your messages are fine, but then you're not delivering on the messages that you're talking about with your customers, or the promise that you're making to your customers. So My background, I've got several years where I worked in marketing for a large corporation. I went out on my own and did Latin American marketing for a while. I tried to see if I could build my own brand and put my money where my mouth is. And I had an online retail store. But for the past, 11, 12 years, I have really been focused on how do I help small businesses who I have a passion for get beyond that initial $1 million mark so that they can start to grow and to scale and achieve their dreams. And it all comes from accelerating their growth by leveraging their brand.
Yeah. I mean, your brand is basically getting the right customers, the right team, and the capital to grow your business. I mean,
Absolutely.
right there in a nutshell, that's the trifecta of what you need to grow your business to the next level. I love that.
Yeah.
And it was interesting what you said was what people do is they think more marketing is the answer to more sales
Yes.
when it's not. You have to pull yourself back and ask if the brand is in line. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So
Yeah.
tell the audience what a brand is. Like
Yeah.
define brand, and because a lot of times people get that confused with marketing and it's
Yes.
completely different.
They are completely different. So, first of all, I'll start off with what is a brand. So, because a brand is really, it's the perception and it's the emotional connection that someone has when they interact with your organization. And those interactions and the perception is formed by the communications as well as the experience they have with every touch point that they have with your organization. So when you think about it that way, when we meet someone, let's say you're at a networking event, or even if you're standing in front of a bunch of products in a grocery store or something like that, we all have this innate need to categorize and slot people in our minds so that we can remember later, right? So when you meet someone, let's say at a networking event, if you don't give me a clear description of what you do and how that's relevant to me, I might make something up, right? I might come up with
Yeah.
something that's just to say, oh, okay, well, I need to remember you and you were the girl in the blue shirt, or, you come up with something if you can't. Well, the same thing happens with businesses, right? So with businesses, your organization, you may work with a customer and they see that you did this service for them. Well, in their brains, that's all you do is that service. And you may have a whole lot of other ways that you could provide value or help that company. But because you did not
100%.
communicate it to them and they did not experience it from you, that's not the brand in their minds. So if they go to refer you to someone else, they're only going to refer you for that piece that they know. So, but the brand, so when I say, the brand is not yours to own, it sits in the minds of the people that you interact with. However, your job is branding or brand strategy, which is to manage that perception as best as you can, so that what they're thinking mirrors what you want them to think. And that comes from consistent messaging and it comes from consistent experience when they interact with your organization. So, branding is the strategic effort of saying, what do we want people to know about our company? And to understand the value. So it comes into play when you talk about, well, gosh, how do we show up? How do we act with our customers? What is our culture? What are our core values? What's the promise that we're making to you if you decide to do business with us? Who is our ideal customer? How are we different from the competition if somebody asks us? So that's branding and brand strategy, is having all of that foundational work in place so that you know how to talk about yourself and you know what products and services to develop for your clients. And you know also the type of experience that you want people to have with your organization so they talk about you in the way that you want them to talk about you.
Yeah. Wasn't it
Yeah.
Jeff Bezos who said your brand is what people say in a room when you're not, or let me rephrase that. I
Yeah.
think he said your brand is what people say when you're not in the room.
When you're not in
I
the
think
room. Exactly.
pretty sure that's the quote. And that's what you just
Yeah.
said. I mean,
Yeah.
it's all of those things. And you can control the narrative by what you do and what you say in your messaging and
Yeah.
how authentic it is. And what I
Yeah.
find so interesting is that people try to be so professional in everything that they do. And I'm not saying to be unprofessional. I like to call myself professionally unprofessional in a lot of the stuff that I do.
Sure,
Oh,
it works.
the things
It's
I do and
authentic. It
say.
makes you human, right?
Yeah, exactly. But I
Yeah,
mean, because what I say is when it comes to creating revenue for your business, authenticity and having fun with your brand
yeah,
is it's a gift. It's what's the great thing about being a business owner. Because we get
absolutely.
so serious into like we need more money, we forget about all the fun things we can do to talk about ourselves. I did a speaking event at the Small Business Owners Community Conference, and what I say to people is that like you think that the marketing people are supposed to be talking about your business when it's you are have more passion about your business, you know more about your business, and you can talk with that joy and authenticity about your business and have some fun with it.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
nobody wants to work with boring people. Sorry,
Right.
they don't.
Absolutely. No, and 2 things
Yeah.
about that. One is, yes, the CEO and the founder of any organization has to be the steward of the brand. They're the ones that sets the tone, walks the talk, and says, "This is who we want to be. This is how we want to show up when we interact with our customers or even employees or investors." So they have to own that and manage that. The other thing I want to say was to answer your question about, well, what's the difference between branding and marketing? Marketing is the tactical part of that. So now marketing is now that you know what your brand is. So again, you know what you do, who you do it for, how you're different, and what you want that experience to be. Marketing then is the piece where you say, all right, well, how do we tell where do we tell our story and how do we tell our story? How do we get in
Right.
front of the people we want to talk to? So then it gets into, all right, do we need digital marketing? Do we need content? Do we need events? Do we need it's the marketing strategy then is what are the best ways that we can get in front of our audience and use the brand messaging to attract them to our organization. So,
Yeah. A question I get a lot is like, how do we know what to do? And so I always say it has to answer yes to three questions. If it answers no to one of these, we don't do it.
okay.
The first one is, are we talking to the right people?
Yep.
Are we talking to the audience that we want to be talking to? The second thing is, are we selling the product we want to sell? Because there's a lot of people who have a lot of services to your point. Like on my website, I talk about strategy and revenue and all those things, but I do a lot more than that. And I pick and choose what I get to do when those other types of projects. But at the
Right.
same time, if it's talking to the right audience and it's selling what I want to sell, um, and I have the capacity to do it, then
Yeah.
the marketing is yes. Because
Right.
I unfortunately have worked with companies who are just like, just go sell more stuff, like get the marketing out there. And then when the leads come in and the sales come in, they don't have the capacity to do it. And
Yeah.
that affects your brand
Oh,
because people are
absolutely.
like, yeah, if you can't fill like a physical order for a product or you can't provide the service in a timely amount that they need in the time that frame that they need to fill it in, that affects your brand negatively.
I'm sure you've had this as much as I have had, where you're talking to the CEO of a company or the founder or something, and they're just like, ah, I worked with this marketing agency, and I feel like we just wasted our money, and
Yeah.
we've had such a bad experience and things like that. And then when I ask him, I'm like, well, what information did you give them? Did you give them
Oh
the
my god, I
brand?
do the same thing. Yes.
I know
See,
it's
this
like,
is
did
why
you
you and I
give
geek
them the
out so on
brand?
this.
I know. It's like,
Yes,
did you
absolutely.
do the work up front to give them the information? Or did you just say, I don't want to deal with marketing. I'm outsourcing it 100% to my marketing agency or person. And then they're making it up. They're
Yeah.
doing the best they can, but they don't know your business like you do. And if you haven't done the work to figure out who is my ideal customer, who actually really loves the value that we provide, if you can't give that information to the marketing agency, again, they're going to do the best they can, but it might not be on point, and that's where you
Right.
start to lose money.
Yeah. What I always say it's a 50% fault.
Mhm.
The business owners are 50% at fault because quite honestly, they don't understand all those things and they didn't do the research like you said. They didn't do the work to set it all up and
Right.
in a way, the marketing agency didn't ask the right questions to begin with.
Yeah.
So, what you and I do, we set those foundations and I love that part of it because the the aha moments that people have about like, oh, I had
Yeah.
no idea that's who our customer actually is.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's so
Right.
interesting. That's a whole, but that the ideal
Yeah.
customer stuff is a whole different topic.
It's a whole
Um,
different topic, but
yeah.
like I said, and from the branding point of view, like you're talking about these aha moments, I love what I do because once I go out and I start talking to customers and I come back and it's like holding a mirror up and I'm presenting to the founder or the executive team or CEO is look at what you do really well. Look at what they love you for, right?
Yeah.
And it's a gift because I had a founder once tell me, he goes, "Oh my gosh, you made me fall in love with my business again."
Oh,
Because we're constantly putting out fires and hearing complaints and, things like that. It's just the day to day that to take a breath and a moment and hear what you're doing well and people recognize it, that truly is a gift and it's inspiring to keep going, right? And
yeah.
that's when we talk about the CEO being the steward of the brand. That's the information that founder, CEO, executive team member needs to be sharing with every person in the organization to say, this is why we do this. This is why it matters. And this is the result of what's coming from your hard work.
Yeah. It's definitely a top down. Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't just give it to the marketing department or the marketing agency, like just fix it or do it. It's
Yeah.
gotta be a top down. It's gotta the enthusiasm has to come from the top. So with
Absolutely.
that said, the when do what are some of the signs that a brand is becoming misaligned
hmm
or inauthentic in their marketing? So like what are some telltale signs, some symptoms that you might not need to rethink your brand?
Yeah. No, absolutely. At the end of the day, when I've talked to a variety of people about, oh, should we rebrand? How do we know when it's time to do that? And really, the time to do that is when it's impeding you from growing, right? So if your brand actually is hurting you more than it's helping you, that's when it's time to rebrand. So some of the signs that you would notice then in terms of when it's time to rebrand are your target audience has changed. So that might be something that occurred. So, you may have been selling the same product or the same service, and maybe your messaging is still on point, but your target market changed. These people used to love your product and buy your product, and all of a sudden now these people are the ones who are doing that. And I have a great example of that for when I started an online retail store because I wanted to see if I could put my money where my mouth is and build a brand. One of the things that I missed in my everyday being a business owner was that my initial target market were busy working moms. That's who I was selling to. And that's what my whole business was built around. My messaging was built around that. Um, but this was at the time around 2008 when the recession hit. And what I did not realize
Yeah.
was that those busy working moms didn't want to spend any more discretionary money on the products that I was selling, which were family fun products. It was things to do with your kids that would just bring joy and fun into the house. What I hadn't realized was that the target market had changed to grandmothers. They still had disposable income and they were interested in buying products for their grandkids that they could have an experience with them or just wanted something that I want to get them something that they can't find at Target or, things like that. But all my messaging was wrong and off point because I kept trying to talk to the busy working mom when my target market had shifted. And I lost about 9 to 12 months before I realized that. And my marketing was not effective. So that's one example of how your target market may have changed. Another example is you may have changed or added more products or services from the day that maybe you started your organization. So I help a lot of companies that have been around for like 5 to 10 years and suddenly, oh my gosh, we have opportunities to grow and we're starting to scale, but we haven't touched our website since the day we started the organization and hardly any of it is even valid or what we're selling
Yeah.
anymore. Right. And so you need to update to make sure that your customers understand exactly what it is that you do. So that's a time for a rebranding. But yeah, or it could just be that, you suddenly now have a lot more innovation in your company and organization, but visually and your messaging and even your experience might be a little bit old fashioned. I worked with a managed IT company who, was trying to tell companies or their clients that they were on the cutting edge of, IT and could help them with any of their IT needs. But because they were so busy, they hadn't spent any time updating their own website and their own systems. And it was like, wait, you're trying to sell them on cloud computing and all of this kind of like high tech stuff. And yet
Yeah.
you look very low tech, right?
Do as I
So
say, not as I do. Yeah.
exactly. And, we've all
Yeah.
been there. I get it. I'm not,
Yeah.
no blame or shame or anything like that.
Yeah.
It happens. But it's a signal that, gosh, this is not representing what you do or helping back up your story and validating your story to your customers. So those are kind of some of the, the reasons for rebranding. There's a lot of other ones, but, if you're launching a new product or division, you're trying to enter a new market, whether you're upscaling to a different type of a customer. I've had some clients come to me and say, hey, we were selling to small businesses, but now we want to sell to middle market firms. Well, they have different needs. So now the
Yeah.
messaging needs to change and
Right.
that's a rebrand. So, but rebranding, you really need to stop and say, why are we doing it? Because it,
Yeah.
it does take time, energy, and money to rebrand. So there has to be a strong strategic reason, behind why you would want to go through this exercise of rebranding your company. But again, if it's hindering you from growing, it's well worth the effort. But you kind of also have to say, are we rebranding the strategy like we're doing something different? Or are we just need to update and rebrand our messaging and our visuals because it's been
Yeah.
left
A
behind?
rebrand is like everything new, where a brand refresh is to keep the same, like, if you think about the logos and the brands and like the colors and all that kind of stuff, and the
Yeah,
messaging needs to be updated. There's a
right.
difference between a rebranding is a lot of time and money, where brand
Yeah,
refresh is just, it still takes time and some money, but at the same time, it might just be like you need to refresh what it is. Because I
right.
know in the 8 years that I've been doing Rebel Girl, like the first 8 were about marketing mostly, and then I came to realize over the past year or so is that what I really do is revenue. So when I
Yep,
rebranded at the beginning of the month to Rebel Girl Revenue, it's because all the strategies that I do are specifically about growing the revenue. And sometimes it's marketing, and sometimes it's your sales efforts. Sometimes it's your client experience timeline and fixing the gaps and the holes in there. And sometimes
yeah,
it's just internal communication. So
yeah,
there's a big difference between a complete rebrand and then just a brand refresh. And it depends upon where you're at. And all the things that you said were absolute. That it's your messaging is not actually saying what you're doing, and you're attracting the wrong kind of people. All of those things that you said are all
yeah.
symptoms, but it's you have to determine, do I need a new brand, or do I need just a refresh of the brand that I already have?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I think
I
you
had
did
yeah.
a great job with your rebranding because I love that you changed marketing to revenue because you do more than just the marketing tactics
Right.
that can be done. So it was a perfect time to rebrand. But one of the things that I always kind of want to throw out there that I believe is that your why or your brand promise of why you started your organization and what you are in business to do, that core DNA and that promise never changes. That will always be why you are in business. Now, the way you go to market, which is everything we've just been talking about, what products and services do you offer? What is your messaging? What's your experience and things like that? That can all be rebranded and can change. But the core of what you stand for, that stays the same no matter,
Yeah.
how you're going to market. And I think that's important to kind of set up as a distinguisher in branding and rebranding. Because if you go so far away from what you started your business to do or your core, well, then you're not rebranding, you're creating a whole new brand,
Yeah.
kind of a thing. So an example, that I'll throw out, I've been reading lately that is making me laugh or cringe, however you want to do it. But I don't know. Do you know the shoe company Allbirds? Okay, so Allbirds makes a very popular shoe. My son had like 8 pairs of them. But they were a wool shoe with kind of like a sneaker bottom, and they were very, very popular in the past couple of years.
Okay.
And a lot of shoe companies copied them, and it was like a big thing. And their core promise was their shoes were sustainably made. So all the components of the shoe and
Yeah.
everything were, sustainable and things like that. So um anyway, they recently sold the company because they felt like they weren't growing as fast as they could. And the CEO of the company said, all right, well, we're going to sell the Allbirds brand. We're going to sell the shoe company. But what they did was they said, and this was the weirdest rebrand story I've ever heard. They said, however, what we're now doing is we're starting a brand called Smartbird, and we now do AI for companies. So they went from manufacturing shoes to we're now doing AI, which that's fine if you separate it. But they tried to leverage the brand equity they had in the shoe company, Allbirds using Smartbirds as the name of the new company. They're trying to leverage and pull, hey, you loved us for this, so we're going to pull some of those attributes over into this new company. But it's such a dichotomy. It's completely different that you're like,
That's crazy.
what are you doing?
That's a
So,
whole different audience because, I mean, for the
yeah,
shoe company, the end users were the kids who wore them. Maybe
yeah,
my kids are in their 20s.
yeah,
They might know about them, I don't.
yeah.
But at the same time, but the buyers were the parents and the grandparents and, like, all that other stuff, where in AI, that's a completely 100% different audience
Oh, yeah,
than what you sold to.
yeah.
Yeah, that makes no sense to me.
And it was funny because as you went on, I went on the new website, Smartbird, and like, okay, well, what's their brand promise kind of a thing? And what are they trying to do? And they're all about AI and all this kind of stuff. But then they're like, but we're keeping the sustainability component from our old brand. And I'm like, again, AI is
How?
not about sustainability. In fact, it's about
Is that
the opposite of that. So again, I was like, I don't know who's counseling these people, but yeah. So, but that's just a story of how it's they tried to rebrand by leveraging what made the first company, and it doesn't work. So
that's bizarre.
yes,
Yeah, I had a client who wanted to do a complete like, a new brand and everything, and we ended up just, not just we did a brand refresh, and it worked really, really, really well, but they stayed with the same core value. They expanded services,
yeah,
but it was still in the same vein of what they were doing, not a
right,
completely different, like, offshoot. That's a crazy
yeah,
story. There's so
yeah,
many stories like that out there that,
right,
that's more cringe than amazement, in my opinion, so,
yes,
yeah.
yes, I agree.
Oh, good lord. Okay,
Yeah,
so for our audience who's listening today, like, if they're, like, not sure if their brand needs a refresh or if their brand needs, like, a complete rebrand, what are some questions they can ask themselves to say, "Okay, maybe I
hmm
need to figure out this whole brand thing situation out."
sure, sure. So there's a couple things that they can do. Is they definitely should ask themselves and take a look and say, has our growth stalled or is our growth declining? And why is that? And, work with the
Mhm.
salespeople to kind of say, hey, are you losing losing more leads, or are we having existing customers go elsewhere? What is it that's causing this stall in our growth? And are we stalled in our growth? So that's kind of the first one. The second one is I would absolutely recommend, talk to your internal people and talk to your external customers, just a handful, and just say, hey, what do you think our brand is? And if you get the weirdest answers or answers that you're just not happy with, that also tells you that you need to possibly do a rebrand. Take a look at your website. Does it really talk to who your ideal audience is? And does it really adequately explain the value you provide and all of the services that you offer? That's another way to kind of say, do I need a rebrand? Kind of a
Yeah.
deal. So, and the other thing is to kind of look at, is there something going on that's different in the organization? Like, are we launching a new product and new service, or are we entering a new market? Maybe we were domestic and now we're going international, or maybe we were only selling in our state and now we're selling around the country. Is there something that you want to make sure when you start your marketing and branding efforts to this new market that you're trying to go into? Do you have the right story that you're trying to tell?
Yeah.
Because you only get one first impression, right? So make
Yeah.
sure your story is straight when you're talking to those people. But anytime there's a big pivot or transition in the company, that's a time where you need to at least stop and say, does this change mean that we need to rebrand? And in many times it doesn't, but sometimes it does, because you're going to
Yeah.
be talking to a new audience, or you're going to be talking about different value that you provide, or talking to a completely different type of customer.
Yeah. What's interesting is that I had a customer that was in the Midwest region where you and I are, and they
Yeah.
were going to a completely different region of the US, and they were trying to
Mhm.
use all the same language. And I was like, well, that's the values we have. I'm not saying that they're bad values. I'm just like, the values that we have, the things that we need are different from the values like on the coasts. They
Yeah.
have different needs, they have different lifestyles, they have different things. So I engaged people who like live in that area to say, okay, like, does this make sense? Is this on brand for this particular area? And they made some really interesting tweaks to it. But like, if you're going to go into a different region, the marketing that you're using in the wherever you are may or may not work in a different even region where you're going to. Even when it comes
Right.
to, Illinois and Wisconsin,
Yeah.
we're neighbors, but at the same time, people in Chicago have different needs than people in Milwaukee even. And so
Right.
I'm thinking mostly about like transit times and, you know, and transport, like especially the transportation area was what I was thinking about, because I have a prospect who is something that is related to transportation. Our transit times here in Milwaukee we complain about them, but they're nothing. I mean,
Yeah.
I went through Chicago yesterday, so at like
Yes.
2 o'clock in the afternoon. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things where it's like it's a completely different experience for them versus the region. So
Yeah.
you have to make sure that you understand what their needs are in that region. So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah,
Whether it's state to state or even within the same state, like you said, urban
yeah,
versus rural. There may be
right,
a complete difference in you're talking about, oh, well, in the urban area, maybe your value proposition is all around saving time, or like you were talking about transportation, commuting and things like that, saves you time, or it's, we're close by. Whereas in rural, it's like, well, no, we're not close by. You are going to have to drive farther to get to us. Let's say if it was a
yeah,
restaurant or store or something like that. So you really need to take a look and say, all right, does our messaging work for everyone that we're trying to target? Or do we need to make sure that our target market is differentiated enough and the messages to those different segments are differentiated enough that everybody understands how you're offering them some value?
yeah. Again, we could geek out on this all day. I love talking about this stuff because
Yes.
it matters and it's
Yeah.
foundational to make for the growth of your business, to make sure that that revenue aspect is there. Because I was in a different podcast, I was talking about sales, and
Yeah.
just because you have $100,000 quota and you hit that $100,000 quota doesn't mean that the profit margins were there. Like,
Yeah.
you're off celebrating, and your operations guy and your CEO are like, wait a second, the profit margins are like this big. You might have hit your like
Right.
quota, but your profit margins are terrible. So what happens is, like, even in this conversation, talking to the right audience and having the right message and making sure your brand resonates and has that emotional connection to it, in the bottom line, it affects revenue. And not
Oh,
just I
absolutely.
made this much in sales, but I made this much in profitability. And we need to focus more on that. But again,
Yeah.
that's probably a whole different episode that I'll be doing.
No,
So
it could be a whole different episode, but it reminds me of a client that I had where we did the branding engagement. And again, it was an IT service provider and they were growing by leaps and bounds. So they were onboarding people like crazy to try and handle the business that they were getting. Well, what happened as they grew was they grew so big that no one understood what the brand was. Every
mm,
salesperson was trying to meet quota by just selling anything, because without leadership giving them the direction of, here's who we want to sell to, here are the products and services we want to sell, here's the margin we're trying to make, and things like that. In the absence of all of that information as they were growing so fast, like you said, salespeople, leadership's complaining and the ops people are complaining like, oh my gosh, they're selling something we don't even do. Right.
Right.
But they got the sale, they made their quota and things like that. And really where the crisis came was the company started to lose key employees because they started to say, you know what, culturally, we're not the same company we were. And I don't want to work
Right.
here anymore. And I don't know what we stand for. And I have a hard time talking about what we do to anyone outside of, the company or even inside of the company. So it was, you had to take the moment to stop and help
Yeah.
them rebrand and say, no, this is who we are. This is the culture we came from, and we're going to continue that going forward and make sure every salesperson knew exactly who we were trying to target, what we were trying to sell them because it was most profitable. And then suddenly everything started to click and gel and
Yeah.
they can grow at a faster pace.
Yeah.
So
Same thing happened to somebody that I worked with, but they lost customers, the best customers. So they were working with all the customers that just bought into like the sales quota versus the customers who like had long-term like brand
yeah,
ambassadors for that company. Yeah. Now the ripple effect of that was massive, but
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's
And
all it's
yeah,
all worth it. So for the audience listening out there, your brand matters. And it's not just about colors and logos and fonts and all the things that you might consider what a brand is. It's what people are talking about, what people say about you when you're not in the room, like
yes.
Jeff Bezos' quote says. So
Yeah.
all right. Any last comments, questions, sarcastic remarks to steal Pat Miller's line?
No, I would just reiterate that, a couple like pithyisms that I like to say or whatever. But no, number one is, I still run into people who are like, oh, we don't do marketing. We don't have a brand. You do. Every time you
Yeah.
interact with someone, you have a brand. And as we said before, if you don't give them the information of what you think you want them to think your brand is, they will make something up and you might not
Yep.
like that. Is the other is every employee within the organization needs to understand what the brand is because every employee is a touch point where you have a chance to make or break your brand. So they need to understand what it is that you are trying to deliver in terms of value to the customer and their role in making sure that that happens. And then the CEO has to be the steward of the brand. So the founder, the CEO, they have to set the tone, communicate it, and then walk the talk. They actually have to make decisions based on what the brand is. So, going back to that IT company, one of the things we helped the president do was we created these little cards, and it had the brand promise on one side and the core values on the other. And he would go into every meeting with his executive team and throw that card in the middle of the table. And at the end of the meeting, whatever decisions they made, they would pick the card up and say, does this reflect our brand promise and does it reflect our core values? And if the answer
Oh, I
was no,
love that.
why are we doing this? And let's start over.
Oh,
So
I love
that
that.
that
Yeah.
is again, that's part of walking the talk. And then the last is just to say, as you said, the brand matters because there's monetary value to the brand, whether it helps with lowering your customer acquisition cost, whether it helps with growth because emotional connections create customer loyalty and relationships, or whether at the end of the day, it helps you get a better valuation if you decide to sell your company because you have this strong brand that has equity and customer loyalty.
Oh, yeah. Oh, excellent, excellent points. All right. Well, I want to just say thank you so much for being on the Pitch to Purchase podcast. I just love our conversations. You are amazing at the branding aspect of things and the marketing. So it's really fun to talk to you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here. And again, anytime, because you and I, we could talk for hours about all kinds of good stuff. And like I said, I love your rebrand and how you're focusing on revenue because, yeah, the way you help your clients is more than just helping them with marketing tactics. So
Absolutely. All right. Thanks again.